Okay, and we're back. Hopefully you're still there. Um, Again, live show. Joining us today, two folks from the Amazon Macie team. We have both Michael Fuller and Ryan Holland. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us to talk about a very exciting product today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Awesome. Well, as the name implies, as what folks can probably see on the screen, we're here to talk Amazon Macie. We've got two guests here for this segment because we have so much to talk about. So I figured I'll shut up and I'll pass it back to you because you guys are the experts, right? Can we talk? Open up the floor. What is Amazon Macie, and what should folks know about it before we get any deeper on it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Ryan's here to correct me when I basically go out of bounds and make stuff up. So that's how we play off each other. Yeah, so Amazon Macie's been around for several years now. We launched it back in 2017. But what's the new news here is we essentially relaunched the service with significant new enhancements last year. So we're only a few months in, and it comes with a significant price reduction, 80 to 95% less than what it was previously, which is one of the big sticking points for customers. As we quickly learned that this data privacy space is it's a large scale. And so what Macie does is essentially focused on helping customers understand at scale, what data do you have, where is it, and is it protected appropriately, which is a non-trivial task, especially again at scale, and data is ever growing. So that's what Macie's laser focused on. That's a big problem. So we're going to solve it in phases. And so this new phase was essentially to help give customers better focus on S3 as being one of the big data stores that most customers have. You guys just talked about S3 and how it's a cornerstone. And then reducing that cost so they can do it at much bigger scale and address more of their data than they were able to previously.
Yeah, that's awesome. Sorry. Yeah, what I was going to say is it feels like this is something that's kind of an indispensable part of the shared responsibility model, right, for operating securely in the cloud. So just kind of stepping back real quick, we at AWS have this concept called the shared responsibility model when it comes to security. And the idea is that we at AWS, we are responsible for the security of the cloud, right? That is the physical infrastructure and anybody who's trying to access it. We're making sure that that is secure. We're making sure that the hardware is secured. But then when you run your applications within the cloud, that is your responsibility. However, we're not leaving you alone. We're trying to give you all the tools that it takes to operate those applications securely. And it sounds like Macie is one of those key tools that we have in that toolbox. Would that be fair to say, Michael?
That's fair. And I think another nuance to it that will hopefully resonate with all the folks that are listening is that to operate more securely, it's got to be a partnership across multiple teams in an organization. You can't put it all on the builder or the developer or the application team. You can't put it all on the security team to do adjacent and somehow do it and not involve the application teams and owners of the resources. So you've got to figure out tools that can allow those two to work in concert. And that's also a non-trivial problem, but that's where we're laser focused in our team with external security services. And Macie's one of those, right? So it's how do you help the builders and developers have visibility into what they're doing while also giving visibility to the security team. So together, they're not stepping on each other's toes. They can move as fast as they want, but they're operating together more securely. And so, yeah, Macie's squarely focused on that. And so you'll see features in Macie like multi-account management, being able to have an application team have visibility into the output and what's it finding, where can you improve your security, but also with the security team have that visibility in parallel, again, so they're not stepping on each other's toes along the way.
Yeah, and maybe before last thing on the talking big here is Macie solves the problem of being able to help identify where my data shouldn't be, or sorry, identifying when it's somewhere it shouldn't be and to protect it. Maybe it's worth mentioning sort of what happens when data is where it shouldn't be, or when access control is not levied in an adequate way, right? So things that come to mind here are data leaks of your application's data. That could include potentially sensitive customer data. And so sort of the ways in which things can fail are innumerable, right? What can happen when data that should be inside is now outside can be problematic. And so Macie is a proactive attempt to be able to use of Macie enables organizations to be proactive about being able to address this before it's identified by external bad actors, let's just say, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, you want to know where your data is. Is it where it should be, right? And are you do you have the right preventative controls in place? And that's something you want to continuously monitor. Again, Macie today is focused on S3, which is one of the largest data stores for most customers, but it'll go beyond that in the future. But yeah, that's where your laser focus today, and it's really goes through those phases. Kind of phase one is most customers will say, well, I'm not absolutely sure what data I have across all of my world of S3. There's lots of account owners and lots of application teams, and we have security policies and best practices in place, but I have not 100% way of ensuring that. And so Macie helps, again, go out and say, what do we have where? And then allow you to analyze that and make sure it's where it's supposed to be. And then it's able to do that ongoing. So now that you've got the area, you've validated that everybody's doing what they should, nothing is where it shouldn't be, everything's protected. How can I monitor that ongoing? And then even better yet, ideally automate that such that if I have something that's moved where it shouldn't be or placed where it shouldn't be, like a credit card number gets it put into a public bucket or into a developer account where it shouldn't be, that the security and the application owner and the resource owner is able to be notified in some form of a product programmatic way such that they can respond to that quickly, and then it lowers the risk that is that's exposed in any way. And so again, it's kind of a twofold of visibility, and then how do you operationalize that ongoing so that it doesn't drag those teams down to basically make sure you're continuously monitoring, and when inevitably something moves or is placed where it shouldn't be, that everybody is aware of that and takes action quickly.
And solving that unknown is actually a big part of this too. Most customers store sensitive data in S3 at some point, right? And that's perfectly fine. But they usually know where they have that, and they usually have that sensitive data in very specific locations. And then as you start growing your footprint, you start getting more and more accounts, and you start creating different accounts for different applications. It can be difficult to understand what developers are putting in that kind of bucket that they've got in their playground account, or they've got in a test account somewhere. And if you don't have that ability from a security perspective to actually check those buckets and make sure that those developers, or that someone's not accidentally putting data somewhere, even if it's not publicly accessible, if it's not somewhere where you've already vetted it and you've expected to have sensitive data there, then that's also still a problem.
Yeah, I can go more nuanced than that. It's like making sure you're tagging your resources appropriately, right? And again, it's not that this is some kind of oversight, right? The developers want to know too. Hey, yeah, it's right. The best practice is I tag buckets that have this kind of data in it with this kind of appropriate tag, and Macie can help give them visibility into when they've not done that and catch it before. Again, it gets out of array.
Brian, I really like how you framed that, because you're right. At the beginning, right, when the architecture kind of fits in a single person's head, and you know what S3 buckets are storing what and where the sensitive data is, this is not so much of a problem. But just about every customer outgrows that so quickly, it's ridiculous. And you're also not, what I really like is you're not saying don't do this, right? People love AWS because of the velocity that it enables. So we do want customers to go out there and run, spin up experimental accounts, spin up dev environments, production environments, or pre-production environments. And sometimes the sensitive data has to be there because that's the whole point of the service. It's critical to the business. It's just that we're now talking about a tool that makes all of that a little bit more sane to manage. Once it stops fitting in somebody's head, or you can't draw a diagram around it anymore, you need that automation. And it sounds like this is what Macie has come to the rescue for.
Exactly.
Great. Well, we mentioned before, and all of us have talked about this term sensitive data a lot of times. And I'm sure each of us, when we hear that term, think of very particular things, maybe social security numbers or credit card numbers, for example, anything you don't want other people to know. But let's just talk shop about what types of data Macie supports and sort of what the motivation is behind what sensitive data is in the eyes of the Macie team.
Right. So that's an ever evolving thing. And it's a big part of the value proposition of the service. It's, we like to talk about, removing undifferentiated heavy lifting, at Amazon. And this is the same here, right? So no customer wants to really spend their time managing, writing regexes or other techniques to detect sensitive data. And then, as that inevitably evolves over time from a compliance or a security team or whomever, regulatory entity, go build some more, or go tune this. So a big part of the service is going to be, or is, for, or we're managing those common sensitive data types across customers that, every customer goes, yeah, that's sensitive to us. Credit card numbers is an example, or credential material, right? Going beyond PII type of personal information. And so we have that today, and we're all across, common PII, common credential material secrets, and then we'll continue to expand that over time in a managed way, such that ideally a customer is like the Macie team's covering ideally 100% of what we consider sensitive data. They can detect it, and we're filtering out what we consider sensitive, because there could be different use cases where a name and an address is highly sensitive in a public bucket, but in a bucket where it's supposed to be, it's not as sensitive. If it's combined with a credit card number, then it's more sensitive. So we try to focus on accurately detecting these different types of sensitive data types, and then giving customers the tools to focus in where it makes the most, where they need to, their particular use case for sensitive data is. And then that'll ever be growing. So as you grow into, localized, driver's licenses in Brazil versus Argentina versus across Europe, again, we're just growing that over time based on customer feedback, such that, again, you should, as sensitive data expands, or even your business expands to other regions and locations, Macie can help cover that without a lot of heavy lift. Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, and some of these detections are can be really hard, right, for customers if they were trying to create them, right? So it's not even just knowing the pattern. So names is a great example, right? A name could really be any two words. Some names are really simple, some names are really complex, and so you really need context as well. So we've got some very advanced contextual aware machine learning models that help understand, is this JFK Airport, right, or is this John F. Kennedy, the person? And so being able to look and build those types of models is something that would be extremely difficult for a lot of customers to do by themselves as well.
So help make this a little bit more real for me. I'm storing a bunch of files in S3. I've been doing that for a while. Is there a specific file format that I need to store these in? Do you support, if I have an Excel sheet with a bunch of specific customer contact information and I forgot to redact a portion of the social security number, will it call that out? Or what if I have loose forms, medical forms that I've collected from first-time patients at my dentist office? Can it work with all those data formats?
Yeah, so I this is where you're highlighting, right, the challenge that you have here. It depends on what the heck do we have out there is the first kind of step one. So again, focus on S3. What we try to do is we try to reduce the onboarding friction to getting going with Macie and walk through those various journeys to be as low as a lift as possible. We like to talk about incremental complexity. How much work is it for me to get to the next step? Because this is a big problem, right? Big challenge to try to tackle. So step number one is we made it really easy to get Macie up and running everywhere on all your accounts, and then manage that from a single account. Oftentimes it's a single team, a data privacy team, a security team that can take charge of being, making sure Macie's on everywhere and making sure that it's configured appropriately, such that, every single team doesn't have to do that heavy lifting, right? And so getting it up and running everywhere and managing it from a single account with integration with AWS organizations makes it easy for customers that have one account or 1,000 or 2,000 accounts, basically really simple to get up and running. And what that does is we integrate it directly with S3. And so without doing any other work, any other permissioning, any other heavy lifting around turning data sources on, we go directly into S3 and we aggregate all of the metadata at the bucket level. So now with a few clicks, you can get a data privacy team can get a view at the bucket level of how many, across thousands of accounts, if you have them, how many buckets do we have? How many objects are in those buckets? What's the total storage size? And then interesting bits like how many buckets do we have publicly accessible? How many buckets do we have that aren't encrypted? How many buckets do we have shared or replicated outside with AWS accounts that are outside of our organization? Again, without any configuration, it gives you all that information. And then it goes deeper into all the metadata within buckets, like resource tags, or even within the encryption. What kind of encryption are we using? Are we using KMS? Are we using KMS with our keys? Or are we using AWS managed KMS keys? So it gives all that with basically no work, little to no work. You get all of that information, and that helps you, Robert, to go and start thinking about, well, where do I want to start? Now I've got my world of S3 in front of me. Where are the buckets I want to dive into and start looking to see, like you said, if there's sensitive data where it maybe shouldn't be. So maybe in the context you said, like maybe a HIPAA environment, well, we tagged all of our buckets, or our accounts are segmented by where we have HIPAA related sensitive information. And then we have accounts and buckets that are not supposed to ever have that information. And so maybe we'll start with the non-HIPAA approved buckets, and maybe we'll do some sensitive data discovery there to ensure that there's no data that leaked out or was inappropriately put in one of those buckets that's not protected as much as the others, or it's used for different use cases. It should never have data in it. And then you start to peel that onion away, and then you kind of take those use cases, basically looking through a lens of what's the highest security value I can get for a reasonable cost. And the cost is both monetary and operational for your team, right? How much work is this going to be to go and evaluate this area? And you kind of customers go on that journey from there and keep peeling that onion and building more and more discovery jobs and operationalization as they go.
Yeah, and one kind of thing that's important to add on that too is, that data privacy or data governance team, they're often responsible for making sure that everyone's following those rules, but they don't necessarily need to actually have access to the data. And that's one thing this integration with organization gives you, is I can delegate access to Macie, to that centralized team. They can look at the metadata on those buckets, see the ones how they're configured, run these jobs on those buckets and see the results without actually needing to have access to the underlying data. So I can go and
or the
process,
account.
or the account even, yeah. So I can process all the objects in those buckets and make sure that there's no sensitive data in there, but I don't have to actually give that data governance person access to the underlying objects themselves.
Yeah,
and then
really
to kind of
important.
follow on the question you'd asked about file formats, which is another really important one, because we see data in all different ways. So there's structured data and then there's unstructured data, right? So it's this a Word document where someone's writing something in, or is it Excel? Excel's really easy. It's fairly structured. And we support that natively, and we support it in a very nice way where we'll tell you exactly which sheet and which row and which column sensitive data was found. So we'll give you very specific locations to where that social security number maybe wasn't redacted. We also support big data formats, which is very common for customers that are doing data lakes now, which is a big source of a lot of data that's powering many applications. And so again, things like Avro and Parquet will again give you the row and the column number, so you know where to go find that data if you had to go redact it. We also support things like CSV, plain text, obviously, but then things like PDFs and Word documents as well. So pretty much a lot of the common formats we see customers, either both structured and unstructured data, where you could possibly have sensitive information.
This is super interesting because, it's more than just surfacing, hey, sensitive data exists here in this document, right? If you're actually surfacing some sort of topological data of where that sensitive data is in a document, to me, that sounds like I can then build automation systems atop those responses from Macie or the results of those scans to then maybe say, hey, above some confidence threshold, auto redact all of this, or submit all of these to a reviewer to then confirm, deny, or replace the sensitive data, which really gets into the last step of the problem here, in my opinion, which is like remediation, right? Hey, Macie's identified your problem. You may have data in a place you didn't perceive it. How can we fix that, or say, okay, no, this is just a misconfiguration of something. How can we change that also? Is that something that you see customers interested in doing? This sort of like live response to results of Macie's scans?
Yeah. I mean, it's important. You touched on a good point there, right? So if I go to a developer and say somewhere in this 100 MB file you have a credit card number, it's not really useful information, right? Because they're going to have to then they have to go read the whole file to figure out where it's at. So being able to give you that location and that context to understand where it's at, it's the only way you can do that. Now, being able to do automated redaction is a lot more difficult, but we do some customers that are trying to do that. But most of the time, there's only a couple things there. You're going to send it to the owner and say, hey, you forgot a credit card number on row 17 or something like that. But being able to tell them where versus just kind of go fix the problem, it makes it a lot more user friendly, and you're a lot more likely to get some compliance out of that versus hey, there's a problem over here, right?
Yeah, and in the spirit of those two teams working together, right, we don't have Macie touching the data in a sense to modify it or do any of that kind of thing. So there's that clear line of demarcation. But Macie, the output of Macie in the form of a finding. So I generate a finding for an object, and I say this object has credit card number in it. It's on this line if it's a text file, for example. And that gets generated to the Macie console where it can be reviewed. But more importantly, it goes out through EventBridge, through Amazon EventBridge. And so you could pick that up, and basically sky's the limit, right? You can write a Lambda job to go do whatever you want, or it could be simple as, integration with a ticketing or workflow system to open a ticket automatically to resource owner and say, hey, in this bucket, in this account, in this region, this is the exact object, and on line 37, there's a credit card number. Will you go please take care of that? So you can, again, the idea here is that once you get going at scale, Macie's really well suited as we try to design most AWS services to scale up, automate, and allow you to kind of run this at scale going forward, no matter how much storage you have.
Right. One of the things you mentioned at the beginning was, we launched Macie a couple years ago, and I understand the team's been hard at work listening to customers, and building that feedback into the product. Can you highlight some of the major launches and then maybe talk about head us toward what we're going to be focusing on here today?
Yeah, so there was a couple things that we wanted to address. So one, we talked about cost, right? So we reduced the cost significantly, by order of magnitude, essentially. And we're not going to stop there. We'll continue as we do in AWS to continue to reduce the costs going forward. The other thing that customers were finding somewhat challenging is that we didn't have as deep of an integration with S3, and so you had to go. There was some heavy lifting to do for customers as far as getting it going. You had to go enable S3 data events, for example, which comes with its own cost, and you didn't have multi-account either. So if you had hundreds of accounts or buckets across hundreds of accounts or thousands of accounts, that was a bit of a task. And so with the new Macie, you enable it like we talked about from a single place. You can, with AWS organizations integration, there's nothing to turn on. We have deep integration with S3 now, so you don't have to go turn on S3 data events, which comes with its own cost. And you're able to kind of get that full view with very little friction and overhead. So it was really that cost, scalability. And then the other key one was the original Macie would also do monitoring for behavior and access to data, which is very adjacent. But we had a lot of customers that were like, I don't want that piece of it. I'm the data privacy team. I'm laser focused on finding where sensitive data is. I do have a security team that is interested in threats associated with, malicious access to my buckets, but it's not the team that, it's not my team. And so there was a little bit of a separation there. So we separated that and moved that into guard duty, which guard duty, as you may or may not know, guard duty is our threat detection service. It's focused no matter what resource it is, whether it's an EC2 instance, your account credentials, or now an S3 bucket, monitoring and telling, a security team, hey, there's something going bump in the night. There's some unusual behavior associated with this resource. Now it could be an S3 bucket. So we moved that over to guard duty. We reduced that cost by 90% as well. And then that moved the newer version of Macie be laser focused on this singular challenge, which is non-trivial. Where is my sensitive data, and help me know all about all the resource of where it is and the permissions, such that I can run it through that question of, is it protected appropriately and is it where it's supposed to be?
Wonderful. Yeah. No one says no to lower costs for something they're interested in using, or hopefully, for folks who the previous price may have been prohibitive, now this enables them to be able to start testing out Macie. We actually had a question from LinkedIn Live. Frank Borman wants to know, can I train Macie with my own data set? So maybe I work in an industry where I know for a fact that this piece of information that is sensitive is probably uncommon for many other customers. Is there any way that I can clue Macie into the fact that this is the shape of something that's sensitive for it to be able to then detect?
Yeah, that's a new addition as well. It's not training, but what we do is in this new capabilities that we've enabled in Macie, you can create now your own custom sensitive data type. So if you have something that's proprietary to your business or unique to your business, you can create your own. We have a nice little wizard in there to create your own and test your own custom data type. So for example, like an Amazon might have Amazon customer ID number that no other company would consider would mean anything to them, but to us it's a sensitive piece of information. Now you can do that in new Macie and detect that there. We are doing modeling and training in general, not in any given customer data, to do things like Ryan mentioned. Names and addresses are really hard to do with just simple regex. They're very false positive prone. So we are doing machine learning. Macie has a dedicated machine learning team. And they're doing interesting things like that. And we're looking for other interesting ways to use machine learning. We also have a goal in the future to get into areas of sensitive data that aren't as easy as to detect as a simple piece of data. So you can imagine a document that doesn't have anything on it necessarily that makes it sensitive that I can detect, but in itself, it's a sales document or a sales quote or an SEC filing or a patent. Right. And maybe there's no single word on there that I could key in on that's going to give me 100% accuracy, but it's IP of mine. And I want Macie to be smart enough to say, I look at all across the different kind of metadata associated with this, maybe even some natural language processing. And I can say, it looks like other documents of this type. And you've told Macie, this is a sensitive type for me. And then it could be able to do that. So we don't do that today, but those are some of the areas where we're exploring with how Macie can start to detect sensitive data in the form of like intellectual property that goes beyond a pattern match of a simple word or string.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add on real quick, the question about the images. There are solutions that are available on AWS if you want to take a look at some of the stuff that our partners have built. If you want to take a look at some of the solutions on Marketplace, this is a really common use case, right? If you take a picture, do you want to blur out? Like the problem is, it's not just you have Macie that can detect all the structured data, but with images, if you want to blur out faces or names or license plates or things like that, or street names, something like that. Definitely take a look at the marketplace. There's a lot of really good partner-driven solutions out there. And that's part of really what makes AWS so powerful, right? There's stuff that we can build, and there's a lot of stuff that just our partners are gonna be just as important in terms of providing an end-to-end solution.
Absolutely.
Yeah, one other thing I could point to that's, if you're interested in Macie, you can use a service like Amazon Textract, a fully pre-trained AI service by which you can feed in documents like PDFs, which again, I know Macie covers that already, but images directly to extract that text, store that, and if you're storing that in S3, then Macie integrates directly with that. You just have a little bit of ETL to perform there. But
that's actually a really good point, right? Anything you can get into S3, we can process. And there's lots of things that can do that. Textract is one example. Databases, right? There's things like DMS, Database Migration Service, which can output writes to a database into S3 in Parquet format. So there's lots of different ways. DynamoDB through Glue can also output into S3. So you don't have to just look at this as you're limited to the objects that you have in S3 today. S3 is extremely extensible, and there's a lot of services, and not just AWS services, but third-party tools that leverage S3 under the covers, or can leverage S3 under the covers for storage. We've seen some examples where we had a blog post we saw one of our partners wrote about using Salesforce. So they set up a workflow that new Salesforce commits were written out to S3 temporarily in order to scan to make sure people weren't putting sensitive data in the wrong fields, right? So it's not just the objects that you're storing in S3 today. It's really anything you can get into there.
Yeah, that's a good point. But one thing maybe I can, so you say that you can do these things. Is that what customers should do? So let me just kind of repeat what you said. Let's say I'm running RDS, so I've got some data in RDS that might contain sensitive fields. Is the prescription from the Macie team to set up a workflow where we're periodically backing this data up to S3 and then having Macie look at that via that integration?
It's something we've seen people do a lot of times for migration, right? So migrations, a lot of times where we'll see people do that is they want to know, like, you've got this database that's been sitting on-prem for long periods of time, and you want to move that into Amazon, but you want to know if there's any sensitive data in that table right before you move it. So that's a use case we have seen customers do. Data migration services, or the database migration services, can do that ongoing. If you wanted to look at ongoing writes to a database, that's a way to do kind of periodic checkpoints. It is also an area we're going to expand to do more native detection in the future as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. It depends on the use case. Again, what it's suited for today, customers, if they have the use cases, I'm going across my entire environment, I'm trying to find where sensitive data may reside, make sure it's in the right place, and it's kind of a point in time thing. You can snapshot a database, or you can move data into S3 temporarily to see that. It's not really well suited in that case to say, well, I want to continuously monitor my DynamoDB database and make sure there's no sensitive data, and even more particularly in this field versus another field, for example, or Redshift or any other native services. Those are areas we're looking at, additional use cases we're looking at. How do you natively support use cases like that? It's not well suited for that today. But it is well suited for, like you said, these spot checks in time, or like the Salesforce use case, or any homegrown or third-party application where you want to make sure a field that you can easily extract the text in a workflow, put it into an S3 bucket, and Macie will evaluate it, and then you can make a decision on it. We see customers doing all sorts of interesting things with building up those kind of workflows for data that's not natively in S3.
Yeah, wonderful. And I'd imagine if folks have data sources that, data has weight and gravity, maybe it's in another service that's not S3. If they have, they want to forward that feedback that they cannot wait for Macie integration, should they forward that along to their account manager or us, yes, or here in the chat? Yeah.
Yeah, anywhere, any of those places are good, and the more the merrier, because sometimes they, so tell everybody. we don't. It doesn't hurt us to hear more from more than one person the same thing. So it's good.
Great. Well, I don't want to delay the demo. We're going to get to that very shortly, I promise. But Michael, before you were talking a little bit about things that weren't necessarily features in Macie, but sounded like best practices, right? Like, how can I strategically decide where I get the best bang for my buck and how I use Macie? You mentioned before, like analyzing the places data shouldn't be first before expanding out and scanning other things or other entities in my architecture. Are there any other best practices you could share to allow customers to get the most out of Macie?
Yeah, it's a really good point. So what I'd say is that the goal we're striving for, which is a big one, is essentially to allow you to be able to have Macie on everywhere across all your data in AWS, no matter where it's stored or moved, and be able to evaluate everything and know what's all sensitive, right? Today, that's a tough challenge because it's costly. So we already mentioned we're going to continue to find ways to reduce costs. We're also going to find additional techniques and get creative and innovative in the back end of how you evaluate for sensitive data, or maybe it's not picking up every single piece of data, which is compute intensive to evaluate. So stay tuned on that, and we're taking on that goal. But in the time being, what does that mean for a best practice? That means that you likely, unless you're very small environment, not going to be able to afford to evaluate all of your data in S3 even. So if you take your entire data in S3, which Macie will tell you by turning it on, right, which you get 30 days for free, and then we only charge you 10 cents per bucket per month to maintain that aggregated view of your S3 metadata, essentially the bucket level. And part of that will give you statistics on what is my roll up of data across all S3 buckets and all my accounts. And if you take that number and multiply it by the Macie pricing plan, you're probably going to say, whoa, no way, right? Can't do it. So what does that mean? That means you have to prioritize. And so the best practice number one is go figure out, kind of have a mental model for saying, what's the highest security bang for the buck, essentially. So for example, a lot of customers tell us, if I had sensitive data in the form of credit cards in one of my public buckets, that would be hair on fire situation. That's pretty high security value. Likely your public bucket information is a small subset of your overall S3 environment. So you could probably afford to scan everything in there now and going forward for a reasonable price and ongoing spend, and it's giving you high security value. So that's a good use case, kind of best practices. Let's peel these use cases down and figure out where we can get started because we can't scan everything. So that's number one. Then I'd say on the back end of that, the best practice is to figure out what you're going to do to operationalize this. So in the case of public buckets and credit card numbers, I would hope that you're not going to get a lot of findings. And so that's, again, really well suited use case for Macie today, because you're not getting millions of findings. You're going to get hopefully a small subset or none, ideally. And then you can operationalize that. You can say, if we ever get a finding, I'm going to open up a ticket right away or a Sev 2 to our security team, our data privacy team. And so it's easy to kind of operationalize that. Think about, what am I going to do on the back end here before I start running jobs that cost money? Think about, what are you going to do on the back end to operationalize this? In the case of where you're talking before around, I need to go spot check some areas and see what's what, kind of that baseline. Let me see if things are in the right places. That is likely going to give you lots of output. You're going to get lots of findings. And so again, best practices, do some small jobs first, see what you get. You might deem, hey, names and addresses are not sensitive in this context to me, so I'm going to suppress those findings. But if it's a credit card number, social security number, or something like that, that is sensitive to me. So doing those in a small way first, and then tuning, the service has suppression ability, so you can suppress these and tune what you're going to get. That's kind of best practice number two. And then three is, if you are going to get large amount of findings, we have customers that say, I know there's sensitive data there. I'm validating their sensitive data there, rather than I'm poking around hoping not to find it where it shouldn't be. So I know I'm going to get potentially hundreds or millions of findings. Think about what you're going to do in the back end for that. Most of our customers will use the Event Bridge support to push that into an elk stack that they've stood up with dashboarding or another BI tool of choice, such that they can go through that volume of data and do analysis on where do we find what, is it where it's supposed to be, and kind of how that's going to be cataloged. Ryan, did you miss anything on best practice?
Yeah, and I would just add one other output too. So Mike touched on the Event Bridge, which is really useful for that positive case where we found something, you want to wire that up to that ticketing system or alerting system. We also write another output, which is a little bit more detailed and includes everything that we've done. You can kind of think of this as like an audit log of your data inspection jobs. So if you need to go and show an auditor that you actually already processed a bucket, so we'll give you an audit log of every object that we looked at and what the result was, even if there was nothing there. So if there was no sensitive data, we'll say as much. If there was sensitive data, we will again give you the same information in the findings. But again, you then have that kind of record that you can store in your S3 bucket that you have for long-term retention, if you need to go back and say, hey, did someone check, that particular bucket, and when did it happen and what was found, you also have that there as well.
Awesome. I know there's some questions that come to mind for me, when we're talking about the cost of scanning buckets, for example. We're looking for sensitive data, and every customer probably has their own custom strategy for how they sort data into different buckets, right? So let's say I have a bucket with a bunch of mixed data types. Maybe
That's
I have
very optimistic, Nick. Have some kind of strategy. we all hope that we have strategies, but maybe not.
Well, maybe perchance who knows why I have mixed data in a bucket, right? God forbid.
Yeah.
But what happens when I perform a Macie scan on that? Do I have to pre-sort out my file types that I know Macie won't be able to scan? Like, how much sort of legwork is there to sort of make sure I'm not getting billed for things that Macie's not going to provide value for?
This is a great point. So as we mentioned before, you can't afford to scan everything. So you need to understand what the costs are going to be. So we've put a lot of work in up front to try to help customers understand that, give them tooling essentially to help understand costs up front beforehand. So one of the first things we do is when we gather all that metadata of S3, we tell you what bucket sizes, we tell you the objects, and we tell you what's classifiable and not classifiable before you run anything. And we're looking at the file extensions, right? So we're saying, this bucket has a terabyte in it, but it's full of image files. We don't support image scanning at the moment for sensitive data, so therefore the classifiable size is 0. And so that's really helpful for customers to understand what's classifiable, what's not. So as you gather a bucket or several buckets and you say, this is the cohort that I'm interested in doing an evaluation on, we move you through kind of a wizard. And part of that is saying, well, what do you want us? We kind of give you an idea, like you said, of what's classifiable, what's not. The other side of that spectrum is what's compressed and not, because if you have a 1 terabyte of compression, it could be 10 terabytes. And so unfortunately, we don't have any way of understanding what the compression ratio is before we pick up the objects and decompress them. But in the service, we give you a little tool. As you pick your buckets, we automatically do the calculations based on the pricing plan and say, well, these buckets you've picked based on what the data says is the amount of objects in there that are classifiable and the number of them that are compressed. Here's basically a good estimate of what this is going to cost you to evaluate all those objects. And you can toggle the compression ratio kind of to best case, worst case to get an idea of what that could be. So that gives customers, the chance to figure out what's this going to cost me and make sure that's palatable and for the use case. And then next, you have some granularity within that, right? You can say, well, I only care about if it's like a large bucket, for example, like one bucket that's very large, and you really only care about a prefix within there, or a set of prefixes, and the other ones you don't want to evaluate. You have that ability to say, well, just Macie only pick up objects with these prefix, or only pick up objects with this tag, or that are of this file type PDF, or any combination thereof. You can do include, exclude rules to say direct Macie and where to look. So you can, again, get really granular on where you want to inspect. And then you can also do sampling if you want. So if it's, again, I'm trying to get an idea of what's where, and I can't afford to scan everything, but I want to get more of a breadth versus a depth, you can say, well, a scanning depth of 20%, we would randomly pick up 20% of the objects in the bucket or buckets you've selected. And that'll lower the cost and give you an idea of kind of what's in there without scanning everything. So those are just some of the examples of how we've kind of helped understand what the cost is and give customers tools to direct Macie on breadth and depth of the scan to where we're going to get results.
Yeah.
Well, I think we should move to the demo. We've talked a lot about this stuff, and the demo always brings it together. Before we do that, I'd like to relay one question I see here in chat. Mad Humida from LinkedIn Live asks, how about geospatial processing? So I think we're talking about various data formats that have some sort of geospatial element to them.
Ryan, are you familiar with any of those formats?
Yeah, it would depend on what the file format output was. If it outputted something like Parquet or an Avro, then absolutely we'd be able to read it. If it was like a proprietary format, then it would not be something that we'd be able to process.
But this is another dimension that we're adding to consistently, right? So kinds of sensitive data we detect and types of file types we support and data stores we support natively. So those 3 dimensions are ones we're continually growing. So please get that feedback back to us on if it's a particular file type that you have of interest, and we'll work to add that support.
Awesome.
All right, well, can we see a demo of all this cool stuff we've been talking about?
Absolutely. So can you guys see the screen now?
Yep, you're good.
Sweet. So this is the we'll first start with that enablement process. We talked early on about, making it very easy for centralized administration of the service across accounts. And this is done through that integration with AWS organizations. So when you have AWS organizations, you have a concept of a organization management account. And this is a feature they've added recently. We have it in a few of our other ESS services called Delegated Administrator. And the idea here is we don't recommend customers use that management account for day-to-day, right? You want to make sure that that's used very sparingly because it's got a lot of power. So through the Delegated Administrator, I can give privileges to another account in order to let that account manage Macie across the entire organization. So when I do that, what it's allowing that account to do is manage Macie itself, but also get access to some of the organization APIs in order to be able to see the different accounts. So now that I've got it turned on in this one account, I now need to go and turn this on across all of my accounts. I've got a fairly small setup here, but you can imagine this will go up to 5,000 accounts. So very simple. If I want to turn Macie on everywhere, there's a select all button, which makes that very nice and simple, add member. And what that's going to do is it's going to turn Macie on in those accounts and make them a member of this management account. When I do that, there's no cost that takes place, right? We're just enabling the service, which starts that metadata gathering and that monitoring. All of the accounts get the first 30 days for free. And after that, that's that 10 cents a bucket per month. So for most customers, 10 cents a bucket is an extremely small amount. But it gives you that ongoing monitoring and the ability to see that metadata. Now, I don't want you to have to go back here and do that every single day, because as you add new accounts, that can be cumbersome. So we've added a feature here called Auto Enable as well. What Auto Enable does is kind of what it sounds like. As a new account joins the organization, or if you create a new account within the organization, it's automatically going to do what I just did for you. So now you no longer have to go and set up that kind of automation when you create new accounts. It's just new account gets added, boom, and it'll automatically have Macie enabled. It'll automatically be a member of this account. So once I've now have my kind of management account set up, this summary page becomes a lot more interesting, because now I'm able to see this data across all of the accounts, those 5 accounts that I have within my organization. And I get to see this aggregated. And we give you at a high level 3 key metrics. So which buckets are public, which is obviously really important. Now, it's not bad to have public buckets. A lot of people do that for certain use cases, like websites, for example. However, you just want to make sure the ones that are public are the ones that you expect to be public. We also show you about the types of encryption that are used, which buckets are not encrypted, which ones are encrypted but are using the server-side encryption with S3 versus KMS-based encryption. And then this last one, which is actually really interesting and fairly unique, and this is how is access to your bucket shared across accounts? So a lot of times you'll have use cases where you need to give access to a bucket to someone in another account, or maybe even a partner or a third party. And so what we're looking at here is the bucket ACL as well as the bucket policy. And we're parsing those to determine whether or not you're allowing access from another account to the bucket. And then we're correlating those accounts to your organization to determine whether or not those accounts are yours, or if you're sharing it with someone with an account that's not a member of your organization. So this is, again, you can just highlight some of those third-party or cross-account sharing use cases. We also monitor for replication as well, which is another feature of S3 where you can replicate buckets. And if you were to replicate a bucket to an account that's not a member of your organization, we'll also alert you to that. And these things that we're monitoring here on the dashboard also can generate findings. So policy findings will show up here. I made a bucket public earlier. And so you can see now I've got a finding that says this bucket was made public. That also goes out CloudWatch events. And this is, again, all part of that bucket monitoring and inventory feature that you get the first 30 days free and then 10 cents a bucket a month. So this will show me any kind of bucket that gets made public. If I were to turn off encryption or set up cross-account sharing or replication outside of my organization, those would all generate similar policy-based findings. The next kind of really important view that people like is I can now see my buckets across all of my accounts. So from this view, as that kind of data governance or data privacy officer, I don't have access to the data in these buckets, but I can see the buckets exist. I can see what account they're in, and I can see how many objects and what size is in these buckets, and then how these buckets are configured, right? How much of this data is compressed versus not compressed, whether or not versioning is enabled, how many objects are there, and then how are these encrypted? Are they encrypted by S3, by KMS, not encrypted at all? And then, very important, again, the publicness, right? So is block public access enabled on the account, on the bucket? And what is the effective set of those permissions? Does this bucket allow public access? And if so. And then again, the tags. So you get this really nice information. The idea here is to help you narrow down kind of those buckets that you want to focus on to do those classification jobs. And again, from here, I can create jobs on these buckets across multiple accounts. And this is that wizard that Mike was talking about, where we're going to walk you through setting up this sensitive data discovery job.
I'd also just point out here, Ryan, also that you can do the querying, because you got a handful of buckets here that's manageable. Yeah. But for a customer that has, 1,000 buckets across, 100 accounts, there's a ability to query in here, so you can query, based on any of this metadata.
That's a good point. So if I wanted to see all my public buckets, I could simply do that. I only have this one because I get a ticket every time I make one. One ticket was plenty. But so again, any of these things here that you see, these plus minus signs, these are all filters that you can then filter against this list of buckets. So you can imagine if I had a policy that said, I'm supposed to tag my buckets with PII if we know they contain PII. I could go and do a filter that says, don't show me those. I want to see the ones that don't. So I can create a job that targets those buckets, again, where I don't expect to find sensitive data. And again, all of these...
it's important, again, across accounts too. So if those buckets are spattered across, tens of accounts, again, this makes it easy to run sensitive data discovery jobs across accounts without having to do it per account. Big plus for large customers that have lots of accounts and lots of buckets.
Yeah, and then as I go through this workflow, again, I'll pick 2 buckets in different accounts. We get this cost estimator. That's what Mike was talking about. So we're going to look in here and say how many objects are actually ones we think we can support, and then what is the compression, if there's compression involved, and how that would affect the cost. And here's where we were saying you can tune that if you know that most things are probably not very well compressed, or if they're highly compressed objects like text. This next part is really important, and especially as you kind of move into operationalization of the service and you want to do this day to day. You definitely don't want to have to come in here and create a new job every time someone asks you, or every single day. You want that ongoing monitoring. And especially for those buckets, like public buckets or buckets that you don't expect sensitive data, you don't want to have to come into the tool every day and run a new job, because you also only want to be scanning the information that's new each time. So we have this concept of a scheduled job. And what this will do is every day, and you can make it do weekly or monthly, we're going to pick up just the new objects. So if you uncheck this box, we're just going to pick new objects going forward from now. If the box is checked, we will do everything that exists there today. And then going forward, just the net new objects. So if there's 100 gigabytes in the bucket now, and then tomorrow you only add a megabyte of data, we're only going to scan that one new megabyte of objects. You also have the option if you want to just do a one-time job as well, if you're just trying to kick the tires. The sampling depth that Mike talked about, if you want to look at kind of breadth versus depth, like I want to do a whole bunch of buckets, but just do 10%. Give me an idea of what's out there. And then these additional kind of filters that we mentioned, right? So by file extension, date, prefixes within the buckets. This is a new feature that actually just came out this week. The size of an object. So maybe you want to exclude things that are really large, or tags that are on the objects. And again, all of these can be positive or negative. So you can say only do objects that match this, or to exclude certain objects that match those types. The next step, and we talked about this, is that customization, right? So writing your own detections, things that are unique to you. The managed data types are the ones that we're gonna manage for you, and those are things that are applicable to most customers. But everyone's gonna have a customer ID or an employee ID or something that's specific to your business, and so you can create those. And you can choose to include those in your job or not. And you can do that on a per job basis, and there's no extra charge for adding those. So kind of the last part is you give the job a name, and then we'll save it and we'll kick it off. And then the job will start processing that data. the output that you're going to get from that is these findings. And so again, we send these findings out, CloudWatch events. We store them also in the console for you that allows you to view the results. So we'll classify these as personal information, multiple, if there's multiple types, financial information, credentials. So like I have a credential file here, PPK. But again, we talked a little bit about the Excel sheets and being able to see, okay, you're telling me there's sensitive data, what type? So we can see here, we found addresses, names, phone numbers, social security numbers. Where was that sensitive data? So in this sheet, it's on sheet 1 in cell B2, the column name is SSN. Okay, well, and there's social security numbers in there. Kind of makes a little bit of sense. But again, it gives you that idea. If I'm going to tell someone they have to go fix this, now I can tell them where, hey, you have a social security number column in this particular Excel sheet, for example. And then again, all that other metadata from the bucket, right? So is it public, right? Because that would be more bad in this case. Is it encrypted or not? Again, you might want to have some workflow. For example, if I found this, I might want to cut a ticket. This is also not encrypted. I could also say, I want to copy over that object with itself and apply a KMS encryption key to that, so I can restrict access to it. Or if it was public, right? Maybe I'm going to send someone a notice, but I'm not going to wait for them to fix it. I'm going to immediately make that not public. So that way, no one can access that while it's being investigated.
Ryan, question about this page that we're looking at here.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier how Macie really starts to shine when you're talking about accounts with really complex workflows with respect to S3, lots of buckets, lots of different accounts, lots of different permissions. And you talked about the importance of having this one account be able to kind of understand what findings are detected, yet not having direct access to those buckets, right? So is it, first off, are we looking at kind of the bird's eye view here? These are findings across all buckets. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. So these are findings across buckets in 2 different accounts. I don't have access. This account doesn't have access to the buckets of the data. You can just see the findings, right? So you don't have to have access to that object. When the job runs in the bucket owner's account, Macie does that processing within that account, so the data is not moved cross account. We have a service link role in the member account, and that's what's used to do the processing. The administrator here, they just get the findings. That's all they need, right? And then they can hand that over to that bucket owner, and they can go and do any sort of remediation that's necessary.
Do we have the ability to scope this part down so that, for example, I want to hand over this page with findings that should only be viewable by a specific account to that account, and that they can go address that without having the ability to see all findings across all accounts?
Yeah, you can't do that now. That's usually done through that event bridge, right? So if I want to tell a particular account owner, hey, we found sensitive data, that's where the event bridge, and you'll send a notice or a ticket, because the event bridge notification goes out, and it's got everything that's on this page. So this kind of page here is just a formatted version of what goes out event bridge. So we send all of that out directly.
But you can see here, just as we talked about with the buckets, you can filter on all this. So if you wanted to say, yeah, only show me buckets that had any of the type of sensitive data that wasn't encrypted, and that's kind of a cohort. But as to Ryan's point, you wouldn't want to come in here and have to do this manually every time. You'd want to kind of identify that these exist, and you're like, oh, this is a problem. We actually have a meaningful number of buckets that aren't encrypted appropriately, but have sensitive data of this type. Then you'd want to go and use EventBridge to set up some automation to go either tell resource owners, or you could even, if it's something like encryption, it's not going to be destructive, right? You could potentially just go ahead and make sure that you just write a Lambda to go do those encryption or change a tag, et cetera, and kind of automate this. The other important thing here to talk about, which is kind of interesting, is Ryan's been showing you this all through an administrative type view, right? The centralized team that sets this up and does these. What about if I'm an individual account owner, I have a separate use case for Macie and I want to run some sensitive data discovery on my own? Is that going to conflict with what Ryan's doing as kind of the central team? And the thing about Macie, the way we set it up is the job owner, the one that set the job to go out and look for things, is the one that owns the findings. So Ryan configured the job. He's the one that's going to get these findings, but they're going to be generated from buckets across accounts. In parallel, an individual account owner could go in and set their own job across their own set of buckets as well in parallel, run those jobs, and they would get the findings. And the findings wouldn't conflict, meaning that Ryan wouldn't have findings in here that kind of are from somebody that set up job in one of the accounts that he's managing, and vice versa. They wouldn't see any of the findings that Ryan has gotten from his jobs that he's set. So that allows, again, that goes back to that theme of allowing an individual account owner, application team to use something like Macie in parallel to a security or data privacy team, and they're not kind of stomping on each other's feet while doing it. It's very unabrasive in that way.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of show one other thing too. We mentioned it a little bit earlier, but not everything that we can detect is an issue for every customer, right? So for some customers, like I might be okay if an object has names as long as there's less than 20, right? That might not be super interesting to me. So I want to reduce my overall kind of set of findings. And so I can go ahead and create suppression rules. And these suppression rules will allow me to ignore those particular events. So those won't go out CloudWatch events. They'll still get generated and they'll show up under the archive section in the console, but it won't go out that event bridge, so you won't get those alerts. So if those suppression rules can be very useful for building criteria that you don't want to be alerted on. And you can do very granular, you can add multiple different types of filters. And so that way, because if there's something that we detect that you don't want to be alerted on, you can go ahead and suppress those, and then you won't get those alerts sent to your event bridge.
Yeah, and that goes back to that, one of the best practices we talked about. So running more manageable jobs to start with, recognizing the things that you care and don't care about, building those suppression rules, and then when you build large jobs or do large volume jobs, you're not flooded with a bunch of erroneous findings that you consider, not interesting.
So I think that's all we had for the demo here today.
You want to show them the usage?
Really quick? Oh, the usage, yeah. I'm sorry, that is one actually thing I should show. So kind of to the point of cost, and because I'm again at that administrative account level, I can see usage across all of my accounts. And so you can click on this and see how much it costs for this preventative control monitoring. That's that 10 cents per bucket per month. Again, every account that you onboard does get the first 30 days for free. And then data discovery jobs, how much was ran from a sense of data discovery. And again, you can see that across all of your different accounts. Every account does have a service quota. This is kind of another kind of circuit breaker in there to make sure you keep cost in line. So if you run a job and the job reaches 5 terabytes, which is the default limit, we will pause the job. We will resume the job next month. These reset every month. However, customers, you can go and update this yourself. So you can go into the service quota tool and say, for this account, I'm okay doing 20 terabytes a month. You can go and change to 20 terabytes. And again, we'll honor that. And you can have different quotas for different accounts. So maybe your developer account, you want to have a lower quota, and your production account, you want to have higher. And again, it won't cancel the job. We'll just simply pause it. We'll wait for the quota to reset at the end of the month, and then we'll pick up where we left off and then kind of catch up along the way.
Yeah, and you can raise those up to a petabyte per account self-service. If you want to go above a petabyte, you can open up a support ticket and we can raise it higher than that for you. There's no scaling limits that we have today. And from a technical way, these are all kind of cost focused, just to make sure that you're aware of what you're spending. Maybe want to show the custom data identifiers, and I think that will kind of wrap it up.
Yeah, so custom data identifiers, these are the way to kind of create through regular expressions the ability to define your own data. And so you would give us a regular expression. You optionally can use keywords or ignore words. So a keyword means that word or one of those words that you put in there, and you can have up to 50, needs to be within the distance that you specify from the string that matches that regular expression. Ignore words is another way of, let's say you have something that is going to match. Like my documentation, we always use the same string for an access key. And I know it's going to match the regular expression, but I don't want to get a finding for every piece of the documentation that's out there. You can give us those ignore words, and if we see that it matches, we'll suppress the finding on that. And then again, you can test that as well. So you don't just have to run the job and figure out that you maybe slightly messed up your definition here. You define your regular expression, and then you can put in a test string here, and we'll tell you whether or not you've properly, it would match the rule that you've created. this is kind of an example here. I did a very simple, 1 character and 5 digits, and so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I did that wrong. I might have got that wrong, but yeah. So you can test that there, and do. Oh, because I didn't put my. That's fine. Keyword. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So you can see I didn't match that string because I didn't have the keyword. Once I added the keyword, it now shows me that it's matched. So it again allows you to test these before you include them in your jobs to make sure that they're working the way that you expect.
Awesome. Well, a really deep demo there, showing that I think there's really something for everyone, right? I think we spoke a lot about the different sort of points in the life cycle an organization may be in and which features may be most value adding from Macie. But I think the thing that should be the takeaway from everyone is that, hey, indexing and aggregating the data on your buckets is extremely low cost. And I think, if you haven't used it before, that seems to be, for everyone, in my opinion, positive ROI. Go do that, get a lay of the land. And then from there, start to think, because if your organization isn't today, you're probably going to have to think tomorrow about, how can I start to figure out where my data is living at my organization? Again, you two are the experts here, Michael and Ryan. Anything else to help people at home get started with Macie, or to, reiterate some of the things that you showed us today?
I would just say, reach out to your account teams, your TAMs, others. We're always willing to jump in as well from the service team side. So, reach out. We're happy to give customer demos, best practices, updates on feature roadmaps. Of course, keep the feedback coming in as well. We're investing heavily in this service. We've doubled down on it with this recent launch, and there's a lot coming down the pipeline. So we're happy to share that with customers and give individual demos and talk through individual use cases. So reach out as early and often, and we're happy to help.
Yeah, thank you very much for the demo. This was really eye-opening for me. One thing I learned was just how you had talked about how mature Macie is when you talk about the operational aspect of it and the cost estimation aspect of it, but nothing quite emphasized that like the demo that I just saw. So I'm really glad to see. I mean, these are features that we really only see in really mature and well thought out services, and to see all the thought that the team has put into operationalizing this thing, not just detecting the issue, but really giving the customers the tools to kind of address the findings, to organize them, to set quotas, to set service limits, custom expressions. I love it. This is customer obsession for sure. And I just wanted to zoom out a little bit, right? I think we can easily kind of get caught up in the details of, does it do this? Does it do this feature? Does it, like, how do you address the findings? But if we zoom out again, this conversation all started because we have the shared responsibility model, and these are tools that are going to help customers protect their data and make sure that they're not leaking any sort of data that they don't want to leak. Not that I don't think anybody ever wants to leak data, but I think all of us can kind of take a very, very short trip down memory lane and remember the last time we read in a newspaper article with a headline with some well-known company that has leaked a massive amount of customer data. You do not want to be in that headline. That is going to be a nightmare, right? And to kind of quote a couple of famous takes on this, right? Jeff Bezos is famously quoted to have saying, like, trust is extremely hard to earn and extremely easy to lose. Another famous person, Warren Buffett, said, I'm going to get this wrong, but he said, lose money for the firm and I'm going to be forgiving, but lose a shred of reputation for the firm and I'm going to be ruthless. These two men are getting at the exact same thing, which is that once you have a customer's trust, once you have their data, especially something like PII, SSN, that kind of thing, it's your responsibility to protect it. And what we're seeing here is a tool that kind of takes you through the end-to-end workflow to help you secure that data. So thank you very much, both of you. This has been fantastic. I learned so much, and I hope all the viewers have as well.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Final statement here. If Macie is something that seems interesting to you, I believe there are some upcoming webinars, one of which is protecting data at scale, another for protecting particularly sensitive data, and another titled event-driven data security. So if any of this was interesting to you and you would like to learn in a hands-on environment, check out these upcoming webinars. Links are going to be there in the Twitch chat. So Michael, Ryan, thank you again for joining us today and showing us a little bit about Amazon Macie.